I hope everybody's okay, of course. We live in very challenging and difficult times, maybe strange times, but definitely unpredictable times. And what will try to do in the next hour or so, maybe I will try to have some also time at the very end for Q&A. So if you would like to ask anything, please note down your questions or maybe write them in the chat, and then at the very end of the study we can actually address them. So what I prepared for you today, it's a seminar on the topic of neuroscience and other brain-related sciences, and how they can help you survive and even thrive in these difficult times. So what I have done is that I have sorry, this is at the very end, I think. So let's go at the very beginning. Much better to start from the beginning rather than from the end. So what I have done is I created a collection of ideas, recommendations, research results, insights, theories about the brain. So it's a collection of material that I found very helpful for myself and for the people that I work with, the clients that I work with throughout the world, which I deliver since the very beginning of the pandemic. So the material you see was put together urgently in March, when the whole lockdown thing started happening in Europe and in the Western world. So I put that together in March, and then it started expanding, changing, morphing into what you will see today. So since March, I think more than 20 companies, associations, university audiences have watched some version of this presentation. Okay, and I have to tell you that since this is part of what I do professionally, I deliver presentations, keynotes, motivational speeches, etc. This has been one of my most popular seminar ever, and of course this goes without saying because of the demands and the specific situation that we go through. But I want to believe, I would like to believe, I hope that it is helpful. And this is why it has been on demand and on repeat on demand, even from the same clients. So I really hope you will enjoy it, and I really hope that it will help you develop some new strategies for this crisis, or maybe validate some of the strategies you already applied and you have seen yourself that they're working during this crisis. Okay, now a lot of materials that I will refer to, but not all, of course, come from the books that I have written. So the last few years I've written 2.5 books, and I say 2.5 because the first book that I wrote, which was Neuroscience for Leaders, together with Dr. Alexandros Sarkogios, it's now in the second edition. So the first edition was published in 2016 with Kogan Page in London, and then we were very grateful and lucky for the publisher to ask us for a second edition rather soon. And the second edition was just released in October 2020. So a lot of stuff come from there. And from my second book, Advanced Marketing Management, that although it says marketing on the title, is really about transformational leadership. So there is a lot of behavioral science, neuroscience, psychology there as well. Okay, and of course, there is a lot of stuff, as you will see, from various sources as they were surfacing during the difficult times we go through. So the materials you see come from this book, from latest research and ways of thinking during the crisis, but also from the more than 5,500 brains I have tested, because I'm also running my applied neuroscience company. So with this company, we have equipment, what is called neurotech or biotech, like electroencephalogram, and other devices that can read implicit and automatic brain responses to situations and to stimuli. So we have done more than 5,500 brain tests from people coming from all around the world, more than 25 countries. And this is something that I have devoted myself almost completely the last few years. and it's something that I believe that can really bring value to the world. So also some of the ideas you will see come from these studies I have performed from countries as like Malaysia, India, Gulf, Russia, Ukraine, Baltic countries, Italy, France, Austria, etc., etc. So you will see also some ideas coming from there. So let's start with this collection of ideas. The first idea I would like to mention is actually something coming from Plato, and Plato was quoted to have said, "Necessity is the mother of invention." Now, why I start with that? Because I kind of believe, and I saw through my own personal experience and through the experience of people I work with and I advise or coach, that crises are, of course, presented us with very important threats, but within these threats, there are also opportunities. Okay, the silver lining that we usually hear about, and Plato was caught very early to have said this. And although actually he did not say it exactly like that, this specific choice of words actually come from a philosopher in the 19th century. Plato said something like, all our creations come from our needs, and the spirit of what he said actually, I think, is very well represented in this quote from the 19th century. So Plato and many others, of course, believe that we do not create, innovate, progress, improve, in a simple way. To put it simply, we do not improve because we want to, but we improve because we have to. Okay, this is and crisis like the one we go through, and it is quite a prolonged crisis. Now the second wave has hit globally, and of course I'm not only referring, of course it is mainly for the pandemic, but it's not only the pandemic. You see what's happening with the elections in the US and what will happen after the elections. We are approaching Brexit in few months. Also, uncertainty is very high. So uncertainty, yes, it is of course heightened because of the pandemic and the novel coronavirus, but it's not only because of the coronavirus. And we live in a period of very high uncertainty, and in these periods of very high uncertainty that create the conditions, the context in which we are obliged, we are pushed. We are actually, we have no alternative than to come up with solutions, because the quality of the solution depends on the quality of the problem. And neuroscience comes to confirm now this. There are many studies, and I quote this mainly on my second book, the fact that the number one emotion that pushes our brain to apply creative problem solving. And creative problem solving is brain's capacity to find new, novel solutions to problems, either old problems and new problems, combining already existing resources or creating new resources to solve a problem in a new way and better than before. Of course, that's very important in the whole equation. So neuroscience has found, and I guess you will be a little bit surprised here if you haven't heard of this before, which is the emotion that motivates the brain to be innovative and creative and in a strong problem-solving mode. The emotion is frustration. Now, many of you might have said, I have to be happy, I have to be hopeful, I have to be optimistic. No, it's nothing of this. Nothing of this. Emotions that push our brain in order to find solutions are negative emotions. It can be frustration or extreme dissatisfaction. Okay, any emotion that portray the inability to accept the current situation and an arousal, an emotional arousal. So it's a strong emotion. It's not a weak emotion, because emotions are also can separate it between passive and active emotion. So it's an active emotion, an active emotion of disliking that create the conditions for our brain to be innovative. And it fits so nicely with what Plato and others have said before. So it is necessity, it is the problem, it is uncertainty, it is deaths all around us. It is gloomy and doomy predictions for the next year. All these create the right soup of motivation in our brain in order for our brain to say, okay, that's it, I cannot take it anymore, I need to act, I need to be proactive, and I need to find solutions. And you know this, I mean, more or less, you know it maybe from yourself deep down inside and intuitively. When you are stressed and you cannot, you focus a lot on a problem, you go to sleep, and while you are asleep, the problem appears in the morning. The solution to the problem appears in the morning, because your brain understands that this is important for you, and since it is important for you, it will use the energy that it needs in order to work overnight, to work in the background behind your conscious level of understanding, and find a solution. If you are happy, if you are satisfied, if you are well, if you are fully optimistic, if you believe that tomorrow everything will go fine, and if you see, I mean, it's not only you believe, but your brain predicts and confirms, then why should the brain spend the energy in the night to find a solution to the problem? On the contrary, if you are totally happy, absolutely happy and serene, in the night the brain will say, fantastic, no extra work to do, I will just create funny, nice, and feel-good factor dreams, okay? So frustration, dissatisfaction, disliking, active negative emotions are better associated, correlated with creative problem solving, innovation, and progress than being happy. Okay, and of course neuroscience has many such counterintuitive and maybe surprising results that we will discuss later. Now, of course, I'm saying this fully trying to be mindful of all the devastation that this coronavirus has brought to the world. People have died, people have lost their jobs, people are under a lot of stress, and we'll discuss stress in a bit. So definitely our hearts and minds are all with these people that go through a very difficult time. So what I say, I don't want it to sound as insensitive to the people that really go through a very difficult time in their lives. Having said that, though, it is exactly we noticing people, loved ones that go through a very difficult time that creates the dissatisfaction, the frustration, and the motivation in the brain to find solutions. So I believe that like in many other crises before, that this crisis will provide an opportunity or various opportunities or the conditions by which we will be find ourselves better in the future because of the solutions that we will find today. Not only, of course, solution which is central to the problem, like a vaccine, but also other solutions to problems that were created or this crisis allowed them to surface. Okay. So what is the agenda? We'll talk about the pandemic as an interrupting event, a little bit about the brain, how to adapt your brain, and some things about the present and the future. So let's call this this event, this crisis, this pandemic, an interruptive event. Of course, you have heard things like a black swan, right? I'm not sure, but maybe you've heard about black swan. Black swan was chosen by Nassim Taleb, Nicholas Nassim Taleb, a modern philosopher. Before he was a philosopher and a prolific author, he was an investor. Right? He was running actually an investment stock market investment business, and he probably made a lot of money there. But he's one of the strongest voices about let's call it modern philosophy. Let's call it like that. I'm not sure it's exactly like that, but something like that. And a few years ago, he published this very famous book, Black Swan, bestseller everywhere, translated in so many countries, that he said that what really challenges our understanding of the world and our ability to predict and prepare for the future is the events that are being characterized as black swans. And the black swan event is when something you thought you knew very well, so you expect it to go in one way, go somewhere different, and goes completely the opposite, I would say. So he quotes this very interesting ontological problem in science, where if, for example, you were in Europe and you opened an encyclopedia in early Europe, you would find that a swan was characterized as a white bird. While when Europeans reached Australia, they actually saw black swans. So this had the strong effect of going back to the writing the encyclopedia, going to the term swan and change it completely. Now, nobody said before we have white swans, but maybe we can find also black or gray. No, we were completely confident because of the data we had that only one type of swans exist in the world. Now, many people were fast to characterize COVID pandemic as a black swan. But Taleb himself came out and he corrected people, saying that this was not a black swan. And it was not a black swan because we were actually expecting it. Maybe we didn't prepare for it, but we're expecting it. And of course, if you go online, you will find out that even Bill Gates in 2014, if I remember correctly, he spoke on TED conference, TED events, and his speech, why we're not prepared for the next pandemic, is quite popular. So we cannot say we did not expect. There were many voices that were saying that the pandemic is coming. Actually, a pandemic is unavoidable and we are not doing anything about it. So he said, please don't call it a black swan. Of course, he found other names. It might be a gray rhino, some people said. Some other people called it a white swan. Anyway, many different other ways of describing it. But regardless if it is a swan, a rhino, or any other animal or bird, it is an interruptive event. And an interrupting event from a neuroscientific perspective, from a brain perspective, is actually an event that forces your brain to recalibrate and reevaluate basic assumptions. So it drastically changes your daily routines when it comes to behavior, but also future plans, which are more a cognitive process of predicting the future and applying, of course, the course of action to reach that future based on the challenges and the possible pathways that your brain finds. So an interruptive event is an event that forces the brain to stop doing what it was doing, because it's actually not possible to continue doing what it was doing, and to reevaluate and try to find new ways of addressing the situation in order to stay alive and, of course, thrive for the future. And if you see a little bit the research, it's very interesting that it points that way. For example, one of the most early studies, academic studies published for the pandemic, and especially the effects of the lockdown that it has on mental and emotional health, was a study coming from China, from the Wuhan region, published in Psychiatry Research Journal. And what they found was, and I will mention few things, they found that there was a very interesting correlation between some social and personal activities and your mental and emotional health. And I will mention only two, which I think are very interesting. First, if people that were without work currently or became unemployed because of the crisis, both of them had a very high correlation with with a drop in both mental and emotional health, which actually tells us, and you will see later, that you need to keep yourself busy. If busy means work, yes. If busy means something else, do something else. But you need to keep your brain occupied. The second and the funniest, I think, but also very interesting, is that they created 3 groups of people that were exercising. And of course, you notice that everybody was talking about you have to exercise, right? You need to exercise since you are staying at home. And the exercise is fantastic, it will help you, etc. So the researchers separated 3 groups for exercise. One basic exercise up to half an hour per day, another one from half an hour to 1.5 hours, and one above, okay, 2 hours and above, actually. And they found out that the group that was exercising the most had the biggest decrease, was correlated with the highest decrease or drop in emotional and mental health. Did anybody say this to you? Did anybody say this? Did any news outlet, health guru, or anybody else come and says, okay, you should exercise, but be careful how much you exercise? Well, it seems that very strong exercising and very long exercising actually was associated with negative emotional mental health. Now you'll say, Nikos, but how can the one cause the other? Okay, I'm not talking about causation. We're talking about correlation. It might be actually the fact that people that are exercising a lot, more than 2 hours per day, they are extroverts, extreme extroverts. They are the same people that are all the time out, hanging with people in the gym, engaging in sports, talking to people, going out, being the heart of the party. So maybe it's not that the exercise causes the drop of mental and emotional health, but it might be an indicator of a type of a personality or of a type of lifestyle that Corona cut, and thus they also had drop on emotional and mental health. There was another interesting early study happened in the US, and this study showed that if you notice here, 2 out of 3 Americans, 68%, they feel everything is out of their control, and 56% saying they're balancing more now than ever during this pandemic. So so today, people lost the sense of control. And one thing that my study of the human brain taught me is that the human brain loves control, because control means predictability, and predictability means survival. So if you don't know if you will go every day from your cave, if we were still cave people, if you were not able to predict that one, you have to go out and find to eat, but you were constantly afraid because you will be killed, because you didn't know that every day you go out you will be killed, you would not progress as species. Okay, so the brain loves control, loves stability, continuity, because it loves survival. And the human brain especially, we have a bigger prefrontal cortex as a part of the total brain. Now, of course, we have a smaller brain than but this is not what matters. So absolute size doesn't matter here. What matters is that our prefrontal cortex it has a bigger share of the brain than in any other mammal or living being on this planet. And this bigger prefrontal cortex give us our ability to time travel mentally, okay, to project the future and to remember the past. And this kind of mental time travel gives us the ability to see if some of can be better than others, and stop the actions that maybe we want to do that we predict that they will not be very good, and allow others that we think that are better. And all this, of course, this mental time travel, the fact that we project the future and we remember the past more than any other species on this planet, allows us to do analysis, strategic analysis, weight the options, do cost-benefit calculations, and then see which course of action we will take. And this provides better control over the situation, better control of us against the environment, and this results in better control of the environment. Okay, I will just mention the fact that we have air conditioning, that in some countries they have the same temperature throughout the year. We have achieved such control over our environment that even we can keep the temperature steady regardless what happens outside of our buildings. Okay, so we love control, and this is what these interruptive events come to destroy. And it comes to destroy the sense of control, and especially the brain's ability to believe in its own predictions. So the brain itself predicts the future and believes in this prediction. If it doesn't believe in this prediction, then it is a stressed brain, because it cannot assign values to the various outcomes, because it doesn't believe the quality information it has in order to create quality predictions. Okay, and this is why many people have heightened levels of stress, fear, and as we will see, anxiety. Now, I will go very fast here. In my first book, this Neuroscience for Leaders, me and my co-author, we identified four pillars. We call them pillars of brain function that create a holistic brain approach to who we are and what we do. So there are cognitive processes in the brain, there is emotional process in the brain, there are behavioral related approaches in the brain, and there are relational approaches in the brain. And the last one, relational, is more a horizontal line to this other vertical, because the relational is important for all cognitive, emotional, and behavioral processes. We are a social species. Okay, we know this. Aristotle said this. We are a social species. We have what is called the social brain theory, that this increase of the prefrontal cortex that I mentioned before, that allows us to plan the future and inhibit behavior, allowed us also to create amazing collaboration and social networks. When I say social networks, I definitely don't mean the online social networks. Okay, this is a false branding. They are not social networks. They should not be called this. But anyway, they claim this term. So the fact that we have a bigger capacity for analysis actually is extremely important for social relationships, because social relationships are taking a big part of our brain operation and energy. Okay, and it's good that it does so, because it had helped Homo sapiens to be a very successful species, more successful, for example, than Neanderthals. One of the main reasons why Neanderthals died, okay, many say climate, etc. Of course, there might be many variables, but the key variable that Homo sapiens is still here and Neanderthal is not, apart from the 2% in our own genes, because we do have a percentage of Neanderthal in us. But the Neanderthals as such are not here, is because they could not collaborate between them as good as Homo sapiens collaborated between the different tribes. So Homo sapiens had a much better collaboration, and thus were more competitive for the same resources than Neanderthals. Neanderthals could not achieve the success we have, because also we have a bigger prefrontal cortex that can analyze more relationships than any other species on the planet. So this is why relational is kind of horizontal, while the other are very cutting all three: cognitive, emotional, behavior. But what I want to mainly point here is that all of these processes have been interrupted because of the pandemic, the lockdowns, and all the other crises that happen to be at the same time on 2020 for the world. So thinking patterns and internal narratives, you need to change them because of the crisis. How your brain creates thoughts and what kind of stories you say to yourself have been impacted, because very simple things like I like to go to the office every morning and make coffee for my colleagues. You cannot go to your office every morning and you cannot make coffees to your colleagues. So this internal narrative that you have about yourself and what makes you, the storytelling that you say for yourself, it's forced to stop and change. Emotional, again, the felt experience and the homeostatic state. Homeostatic state, okay, there's a basic biological homeostatic state, which is, for example, our temperature. Humans, wherever we are, we have an average temperature of, let's say, 36.6, 36.7, 36.5. It plays around there. And when your body experiences high fever or hypothermia, it initiates a lot of action in order to bring back the normal state. This is what is a homeostatic state, is the normal state. And we have your emotional normal state. We are all stressed, okay? We all have hopes. We all have people we love or we hate. All this is very normal for the human experience. But a crisis like this is challenging, and it pushes us away from the homeostatic state, which our brain has more or less used to be the operational mode for every day. So what the brain now does is urgently is trying to analyze the situation to find ways to bring us back to our baseline. Okay, this is the homeostatic state. Behavioral habits and intentionality changes, what I said about going in the morning as a behavior and a habit also is interrupted, and many others. And relationship, social interaction, and in-group, out-group membership. Also, the way that we interact with the world changed drastically because of the coronavirus. So all of the basic functionalities, or group of functionalities, I better call them groups of functionalities of the brain, they are all impacted quite a lot. So what is the brain all about? The brain is, maybe it's strange to say what the brain is all about, since we all have brains since we are born, but unfortunately not all of us had the chance to understand why we have a brain. And the brain is there in order to be the behavioral center for making the actions necessary to survive. This you knew, right? But this is an old model to say that the brain is there only to help us survive. It's a little bit old model. There's also to help us thrive, because there are motivational networks in the brain that help you survive, but there are motivational networks of the brain that helps you to thrive, to do better, to be more. Okay. So it's not like if you survive, meaning if you have what to eat today, tomorrow, the other day, etc., that your brain doesn't need to work anymore because you actually secured your survival, and it stops and helps you only to eat every day. No, your brain still gives you motivation, still gives you many pushes and a lot of processes in order to do more. So it's not only to survive, it's also to thrive. And it does this through three levels of processes: meta strategies, strategies, and tactics. The meta strategy is what let's start actually from the bottom. The tactics. The tactics are what the brain has learned that works every day for you. Huh? It provides you the comfort, the excitement, the positive versus negative emotions ratio that you need in order to be successful in your life. So the tactics are things like specific words or micro movements you might do every day. So you go to a meeting. If you have learned to talk in the meeting early, or to wait until the end, or to talk with specific words, or to make a joke. All these are tactics, and these tactics, of course, are very different. They're very short term, and are very different between situations. You have a completely, you might have different tactics for different meetings. You have different tactics for meetings with your boss, different tactics with meetings with your students, different tactics for meetings with your family. Okay, then we have strategies. These are context specifics. Okay, so these are not the exact words, but this is the preparation that your brain does for a specific situation. So if I use the same examples, if you know you meet your family, I don't know, your parents-in-law on Sunday, your brain calibrates and creates the necessary prepared actions that have it learned from past experience that work best in that situation. And of course, these strategies have its own tactics. As I said, different strategy for a meeting, different strategy for meeting your family, different strategy for maybe going out with your friends in the pub to have a beer, so or to the movies. Okay, and the biggest, the highest level of brain processes is meta strategies. This is like general attitudes, your personality traits, your mind, your overall mindset. Okay, your temperament. These are things that are there, that run throughout the strategy and the tactics. Of course, they can a little bit adapt to the situation, but generally they're quite fixed. Okay, this is why I say low flexibility. And if you really think about it, all three are forced to change because of the crisis. Tactics, definitely. You know, it's different when I'm next to my colleagues at the office and we talk, and different when we're on Zoom or on Microsoft Teams. The channel of communication we use makes some of our tactics obsolete and require new tactics. The same with strategies. And the more the crisis and the new situation is still on, and it is still on, and many people say that it will still be on for probably the whole next year, the more then meta strategies need to change as well. Because the more a situation remains, the more the meta strategic, the most important, the most long-term approaches of the brain need to change as well. Okay, now this is something that I usually refer for many, because it's central to what we talk about the brain, and I will make a connection of what we discussed up to now. So the brain is only 2% of your body mass, but it spends more than 20% of your total body energy. So only the brain is only 2% of your body as mass, but spends 20% or 25%, depending on what we measure. If we measure glucose, it's 20. If we measure oxygen, it's 25. So it depends on what we measure. It spends a lot of energy. It's the most energy-devouring organ. And a lot of this energy is already gone for you doing nothing in unconscious processes, predictions, habits, you staying alive, meaning bodily functions, etc. 90% actually of the brain's energy is already gone without you doing nothing consciously. So from the 20%, 18% is already gone, and you have only 2%. So the brain does not have the energy it needs for everything all the time. So it needs to strategically and cleverly decide what is happening, what will happen in the next minutes, seconds, hours, etc., in order to make sure it will have enough energy to allocate to the right part of the brains in order to survive and thrive. So it cannot be generous with the energy. The energy is finite, it's not infinite, okay? So it's very, how the brain allocates and spends energy is of crucial importance for the brain. And it does this, as I said, because of efficiency, to be able to predict what will be needed in order to reserve energy for it. And for things very simple, like, you know, if you work a lot for a few weeks, and you are very tired, maybe you work overnight, you don't eat properly, you don't rest properly, and then one morning you go out of home and there is a car that goes to hit you, and because of the tiredness, the brain does not have the right energy and the right spark to react fast, and maybe you jump out of the way a little bit later than you should, and maybe you get injured. Now, this is very important for the brain. The brain did not have enough energy to allocate not only on thinking processes. When I talk about the brain and energy, don't think about thinking. Thinking is the least. I'm talking about action. So motor behavior, to actually move, move your head, move your eyes, move your whole body out of the way of a coming car, for example. So it needs to be extremely efficient in how it deals with energy. As I said, there is no energy, enough energy to go around the brain all the time. So it needs to plan and to predict and to reserve. And this is what the crisis does. It interrupts this prediction. And since this prediction is interrupted, what the brain will say, oops, but everything that I predicted, it doesn't seem to go like I predicted or how I was used to, habits. So I need to recalibrate the prediction model. Okay, and that's the problem now. The fact that the brain cannot predict, it needs to be alert. Being alert means being in fear, because fear is a threat management emotion. Actually, the fear system in the brain is a threat management system. Okay, threat management systems have two things that they need to do: to detect and to react. Okay, so when we say threat management, it's understanding that something is threat and acting upon this possibility that it's coming towards us. And this is what fear and stress is all about, this arousal of the brain. The brain cannot relax because it cannot predict as much as it could predict before, of course. And now a very central theme to today's seminar is the difference between fear and anxiety, because this I found it was the most helpful for me, I hope for you as well, in dealing with the crisis and helping my family, my friends, but also my students and my clients. Okay, there is a difference between fear and anxiety from a neuroscientific perspective, and this is what Joseph Ledoux, one very famous neuroscientist, explains in his book Anxious. It's a fantastic book. It's a little bit technical, but if you want to dive into more meeting this situation, you can, I can definitely recommend it. So what is the difference between fear and anxiety? First of all, they're different phenomena, it's not the same thing. They're both triggered by a crisis, and this crisis as well. They are both anticipation of danger and pain, so both fear and anxiety are part of what is called the threat management system. They're just different ways of reacting to threat. Okay, they are both negative emotions and aroused responses. You remember what I said? Aroused, they're passive and active emotions. Both fear and anxiety, they're active emotions. They're emotions that pushes you very fast to act and constantly to act. Okay, and this is the difference between the two. These are the main differences. Threat is present and identifiable, yes, in fear. Evoked by specific cues, yes, in fear. Connection to threat is reasonable, yes, in fear. Usually episodic. So fear has a start, the event that causes fear has a start and an end. So when you see the car going to hit you, it has a start. You see the car that is about to hit you. When it avoids you and everything is fine, the episode has finished. Now, of course, there are some residuals and you still feel fear. You have cortisol in your body. Adrenaline is actually very fast, and also is not absorbed by the brain, but cortisol that comes after, it stays a little bit longer and is absorbed for the brain. It has a little bit longer lasting effect, but the event is over. If you sit at home, there is no car trying to hit you. Okay, overall quality of the emergency, yes. And look at the last one, overall quality of sustained vigilance, the need to be vigilant over time, no, with fear, because the episode has finished. So I will say again, a fear is the threat management response system of our brain when something is present, is real, is tangible, is going to probably create some pain in us. It's fast. There is an emergency issue, but it has also an on and off. It has a beginning and start. Now, what is anxiety then? Anxiety, although technically is not correct what I'm going to say, but I think it will help you understand better. Anxiety is constant fear. Okay, anxiety doesn't need a present stimulus to get on. It doesn't need a specific information to be triggered. Anxiety is when fear becomes your new homeostatic state. It's when fear becomes the normal way you react to the world. So your role as somebody that is an active person in the society, in your teams, your students, your family, your friends, your colleagues, your customers, your suppliers, whatever you do, is to make sure everybody addresses fear as fear and does not allow fear to become anxiety. Now, of course, I need to say that both fear and anxiety in normal levels are normal parts of the brain reaction to such situations. But unfortunately, anxiety has the tendency to become what is called in the US GAD, general anxiety disorder. Because the more it stays, the more it nests in you and becomes the normal way you perceive and react to the world, the more it incapacitates you to respond best in situations. So how do you do this? How can you make sure fear is fear and doesn't become anxiety? Okay, or low levels of anxiety do not become strong anxiety, and especially an anxiety disorder. Okay, like a neurosis, for example, which is an anxiety disorder. So what do we do? Here is when you have to switch on your rational brain, the inhibitor that we said before, right? The rational brain. And here where you need to be extra careful not to allow yourself and others to avoid fear. Don't allow yourself and others hide, downgrade, put underneath the carpet, be strong on the surface, like fear is not something you do. All these are unhealthy approaches to fear. The most healthy approach to fear is to recognize that fear is there, to recognize it, to address it rationally and analytically. Say, okay, this is a fear. I might lose my job. Why is this a fear? Meaning, why did I see in the world that motivates me to think I might lose my job, or fearing that I'll lose? You have to write it down, even with your team. Take a freaking flip chart, put it on, and make a graph and say, these are the triggers of our fear. This is the fear, these are the possible consequences, and these are the possible actions to deal with everything. The more you address fear head to head, analytically, logically, calmly, and also tangibly in real world way, the more you can find it in the fear territory and not to go to the anxiety territory. Okay, the more you avoid addressing your fear, the more you hide the fear, the more you're playing it, we are playing it that we don't care about the fear, the more we put gas into the flame, and the fear will very possible become anxiety. So we need a fear management discussion, okay, both with yourself and with your people. Now, this is one of the most famous, if not the most famous, academic paper about the neuroscience, their neurobiological and psychological analysis of anxiety. And you will see that there are 4 conditions, let's call them symptoms, by which you can recognize that somebody has anxiety, which, as I said, low anxiety is fine, is healthy, but we have to make sure it doesn't become, big anxiety and close to anxiety disorder. The first is that we have a judgment bias. We have inflated estimates of threat, cost, and probability. Like, that's it, I will lose my job for sure. So you predict automatically and intuitively much more harm than the reality says so. So maybe a friend of yours comes and says, hey, Nikos, why are you saying this? We don't know anything. You just, you just make this up. Oh, but you see another school or another company laid off people. So you lose the balance, and it is called judgment bias, of the value that possible future outcomes have. Okay, the next symptom is called interpretation bias, and this is not only when something happens you give different values than normally we should give, but also your perception has changed, and you notice more events that could be considered a threat than normal. So you receive actually an email saying these are difficult times for the company, and say immediately, oh, this is another element of the data that I have in order to think that I'm losing my job. So maybe your manager or your line manager or your supervisor didn't smile to you one day, and you will recognize this as a threat. So your attention is biased, and the interpretation of the stimuli in the normal world are unnecessarily negative. The third one is deficient safety learning, and this is one of the most important. Unfortunately, when we are in high anxiety, in anxiety levels, we do not learn from the situation. So maybe we were afraid that when we will go in a meeting, this is the meeting that will lay us off. You go into the meeting, you are not laid off, and instead of coming out and learn from the situation in order to predict the outcome better, this learning, automatic learning process in the brain is interrupted towards anxiety. So instead of learning and adding this as new data that must change your prediction model, on the contrary, you ignore it and you consider even making it worse, your anxiety prediction model. So the natural learning capacity of the brain has been impaired. And the last one is that we have a behavioral and cognitive avoidance. Of course, it's a confirmation bias. We see everything as confirming what we want, and we avoid things. For example, if we have a very positive friend that sees everything positive, we stop talking to them. And the last one, which is this is the fifth and kind of an umbrella one, we are in a constant alert status. So the four previous ones combined actually leads to a heightened reactivity to threat uncertainty. We become more anxious because we are anxious. Okay, this is what this actually says. And this is a situation which is unfortunately like a vicious circle. And this research that I showed you from the US in the beginning has the one that found that Americans are feeling that they don't have control of their life anymore, and this is what causes a lot of stress, and stress causes fear and anxiety, is that it shouldn't be that way. This research showed that we can take action to reduce the possibility that we go into strong anxiety territory. What can we do? Look, people that were more mentally and emotionally healthy because of the crisis, how did they do it? First of all, they checked in with a loved one, 60%. It is fantastic. Increased my exercise, but not a lot. You remember, don't go to the 2 hours, 35%. Limited my news consumption. Very interesting, because what the brain does in these situations, in its unpredictability mode of knowing what will happen next and its inability to assign good values to predictions, it increases its attention to news. So it goes and it consumes more information than before because it's stressed to understand what is happening. Unfortunately, in this effort to collect more data and more data to understand what will happen, we also consume rubbish data, okay, conspiracy theories and many things like that. So actually limiting, or I would say even better, being very selective, open and selective. It might look like a paradox, but it's not. Open means check also sources that you might not agree with. Selective, don't go everywhere, but choose the most high quality. This is why it looks like a paradox, but it's not. They limited anyway, they limited news consumption by 30%. Performed act of kindness to others, 30%. So there are ways by which we can influence our brain's tendency to create anxiety out of fear. And there are specific actions we have to do. Now, we don't have the time, unfortunately, to go through this, but this is a fantastic breakdown of what it means to have fear. And as we said, fear and anxiety are there because prediction means pain. You think that something that happens now, it will happen, will either causes you now or is about to cause you pain. But in order to understand this system, we have to understand what types of pain are there, because every different type of pain has a different type of reaction or dealing with it. And this is a great categorization of pains by Brock Baston. He's a psychologist from Australia, and in his book The Other Side of Happiness, he talks about 4 different types of pain: physical, emotional, social, existential. Each one has a specific type of pain, but also it has its equivalent, its own pleasure, in which we can deal with if we apply it or if we resolve the pain. Okay, so the pleasure is the opposite of the pain. And this is very interesting because many times we confuse the problem with the solution. It is very nice to know which solution we are looking for each problem. Of course, emotional pains are very heightened now because of the crisis. Social pains, because of the lockdown and our inability to meet with friends and loved ones and colleagues, also they are strong. But because exactly of the possibility of losing our lives, you will see that many therapists online, they started since March talk a lot about the existential pains, the pains that have to do with us being alive and continuing our life or not, which are also strong and we need to address. Okay, but I think what is very important, and it maybe connects with how I started, is this. So Bastian says in his book, in order to find true happiness, we need to embrace a more fearless approach to living. Okay, we need to approach negative experiences. We need to experience pain. You remember what I said? Approach fear heads-on, experience it, analyze it, and deal with it tangibly. This is not avoiding. This is not hiding. This is not trying to run away from things. So by pain, I mean all the things that are not pleasure. I mean the anxiety of a significant challenge and the loneliness of failure. I mean the sadness of a relationship breakup or the fear of our own mortality. And he ends, they are necessary for happiness. Without pain, there is no way to achieve real happiness. And I think this is maybe the most fitting way to finish the seminar, because it's kind of bring us full circle from the initial statement that I had from Plato. So Plato said our needs determine our creations, or necessity is the mother of invention. I would even go one step ahead based on neuroscience and psychology and say that even existential fear and existential pain is necessary for meaning in life. Meaning in life is not created, and there's a fantastic article in New York Times about this from actually, I think he's a British philosopher. He teaches in the US, that he quotes ancient Greek tragedy and saying that tragedy is a necessary part of life that help us appreciate life, develop values, and taking the action to preserve it. While when we are living in societies which are hedonistic, which are self-centered, which are all about me, myself, and I, which are all about my pleasure, which is I want it all and I want it now, then we are losing this invaluable psychological, neurological, and sociological process that gives value to who we are and what we do. So thank you very much for your attention. I think we finished just shy of 1 hour, and we have maybe few minutes for Q&A if there is something that you would like to